וגם אני פתאום רואה את הקולות.
Hello and welcome to Kolot. This is your host, Rabbi Hillel Kappenstein, director of the Columbus Community Kollel, and it's a great honor and privilege to welcome you to our next episode featuring Dovid Becker. The topics that we're going to discuss will be incredibly relevant. In fact, we're going to entitle this one, The Gift of ADHD. Yes, you heard that right. The gift of having ADHD. This is going to be awesome. I'm telling you, you're going to want to share this with all your friends. And that actually would be a great idea, because if you could share this episode or any episode with your friends, that would be awesome. Thankfully, we have listeners in I think half a dozen countries now, besides many states in the United States. We're being listened to around the world. So if you could also continue that, that would be awesome. But back to what we're going to be discussing today. Did you ever think that people with ADHD could be way more talented than others? Well, you're going to learn how on this episode, but there might be some other things that you have to know. And if you don't know those, there could be some trouble. So right here on Kolot, you're going to hear all of that with our guru, Dovid Becker. But, you know, before we bring Dovid on, I think we got to tell you a little bit about our guest. Dovid Becker, LCSW, is passionate about and specializes in helping people of all ages live a better life with ADHD. He is a program coordinator and professor at Wurzweiler School of Social Work. When he gets bored and needs extra stimulation, he runs a popular day camp in New Jersey. Dovid, thank you so much for joining Kolot.
Good morning. Hi, hello. How are you? Great to be here. Actually an honor to be here. This is awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So we're going to get straight to the point right now. What's the gift of having ADHD? Is there any? Was I telling the truth before? Is there really a gift of having ADHD? And if so, what is that?
So I don't know where that really came from. No, I'm kidding. ADHD is awesomeness. It is. It comes with a lot of challenges, a lot of hardship, and just a lot of things to work through and figure out. But it also opens you up to so many amazing opportunities in life that neurotypical people unfortunately don't have. And, you know, we kind of feel bad for them, but it's okay. They can do well in other areas. The child or adult with ADHD does possess the ability to really soar if we can find the space for him or her to succeed. And that's what I hope to talk about, because I think it's so important, and I'd love to have a chance to get this message out as much as I can.
No, and I appreciate that. You know, it's so interesting because we always hear ADHD in a negative sense, like, oh, this guy, he's so ADD, or, you know, I can't focus. I have my ADHD or whatever is getting in the way, right? Even if, you know, like I once told you, I graduated with an ADD from Harvard. But jokes aside, you know, I think let's start from the beginning. What is ADHD? What is it?
Awesome question, because you're 100% right. In society, ADHD became a joke. It's like, yeah, it's my ADD. You're right. Everyone talks about it. For some people, it's not a joke. For some people, it's real. We do live in the 21st century, so disclaimer that we're all a little bit ADD at this point, ADHD at this point. Social media, society is really driving us in that direction. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, and if you're feeling like life is coming at you really fast and you can't handle it, that also may be normal. So differentiating between what's neurotypical and what's neurodivergent is really important. So to get started, ADHD is one of the hardest parts about wrapping your head around it is that the most classic mistake that everyone makes. They think, I can't be ADD because I focus really well. You know, I do a great job of focusing. And it says attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So the truth is that people with ADHD don't have trouble focusing at all. And that might come as a shock to you. They can focus just as well as anyone. In fact, it becomes a lot better. They can do something called hyperfocus, where they can get all in on something, all in on a project and see it through and do amazing. The challenge is controlling what they focus. So it's nice to have that ability to really get into something and concentrate on it, but you have to be able to access it. You have to be able to get your brain to focus on it. Now, if you can't choose what you're focusing, so then you're just going to go with whatever, the shiniest object in the room. That's where the old joke comes from. Attention ADHD, attention deficit. Hey, donuts, right? It makes sense because you're in the middle of something, right? And then all of a sudden there's a donut there, and that just grabs your attention. So basically, anything that's out there that's the shiniest object in the room is going to grab your attention, and you're going to disappear into a world of distraction. So you may have an incredible idea, like a business idea, and you'll get all involved and start working on it. And then another idea will pop into your head, and you kind of drop the first one and go on to the second one. And then you'll have another idea and drop the second one, go on to the third one. Next thing you know, you're all over the place, feeling overwhelmed, getting nothing done, and feeling like a failure and a loser. So primarily ADHD is a difficulty of prioritizing focus, choosing what to focus on. If you can engage with something, you're awesome. You're off to the races. You can get things done in the most incredible way, creative, out of the box. You'll come up with solutions, strategies, and no one else thought of. Amazing problem solving. But to get yourself there could be painful and torturous. It's a difficulty in task initiation. Just getting started with something is going to drive you crazy. So that's part one. I'd say part one of ADHD is that ability to choose what you're focusing on. I can't tell you how many parents come to me and they say, hey, my son he can't possibly be ADHD because, you should see him with an Xbox. Ned Hallowell says, there's no ADHD in an Xbox, because that's exciting, it's fun, it's entertaining. So if a kid's on an Xbox, there's nobody home. You could tell him, Johnny, the house is burning down. All right, I'll be right there. There's nobody home.
Sure.
The flames are coming into the room, and the kid's on an Xbox. You can't break that focus. That's hyper focus. But choosing what to focus on, whole different story. So if you think about it in a classroom setting when you're a kid, and you're trying to listen to your teacher. So if you have the type of teacher who's visual, who's exciting, who's elaborate, who's all over the map, like a real camp head counselor type, then you'll be great. But if you have someone who's a little more didactic, a little less animated, then anything in the room that's just going to grab your attention a little bit is going to have you disappearing, and you'll lose the whole lesson. It could be as innocuous as a bug crawling across your butt, and wow, that's really cool. How many legs does that bug have? Next thing you know, you're in bugland. And you're watching a bug move in your head and getting kicked out for not paying attention. So that's part one.
Yeah. Now, before we get to part two, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned about, you said that we live in this generation of ADD. So does that mean that it's, more, as they say, nurture versus nature, that it's really something in society? Or is there a genetic component to it where really the person's not so much at fault because it was something that they were born with, and what can you do about that?
This is a big one, because when working with parents, you'll get this question all the time, because parents are concerned. It's like, did I do something to cause this? Like, is this kind of my fault? I don't feel so great about my parenting skills. Did I do it? So the answer is really no. You can't cause ADHD. There is a genetic biological component, and it is part of how the prefrontal cortex develops. But there are environmental factors that play in as well. So as an example, children with ADHD have a 90% chance of carrying some sort of ADHD, different symptoms, different levels into adulthood, which tells us that it's something that's biological, it's something you're born with, and it's likely there to stay in some way, shape, or form. So we can't fight it, but we could learn to live with it, and we could learn to master ADHD and really develop and thrive.
Well, one second. I gotta stop you right there. So
go ahead.
If it's partially my ADD, but are you saying that this is not true? That he has ADD, but don't worry, we don't need to treat. He's going to grow out of it. Are you saying that's not true?
So no. Well, kind of. He's not going to grow out of it. He'll always have it. He may not need treatment into adulthood. Mm-hmm. Lots of adults with ADHD are doing just fine in many areas of their lives. Mm-hmm. Even more than those are really struggling. They may be struggling at work. They may be struggling with relationships, close relationships, intimate relationships, so many things that come up. But just because you have ADHD as a child doesn't mean that you'll still need to be in treatment or take medication, et cetera, for the rest of your life. So does that help you feel a little better?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. No, but I think that people just, they're so misinformed. You hear them throw these things around. Is it true that ADHD is the most underdiagnosed and overdiagnosed all at the same time? And if so, why is that?
Yes, first of all, and how'd you pick that up? That's great. Um,
I,
yeah.
lis- I listened. I listened to you when we spoke Motzei Shabbos.
Oh, so then maybe it's not your ADHD. I wasn't sure if you were concentrating on the conversation or not. Yeah, ADHD tends to get underdiagnosed a lot, and it also gets overdiagnosed. It gets underdiagnosed for a couple of reasons. First of all, in children, there are different types of ADHD. So there's the hyperactive. There's actually three types. There's hyperactive. Those are the kids who are fidgety. They're all over the place. They can't sit still. They're blurting things out. They're just, those are the ones that are kind of obvious. Everyone's like, oh, he's ADHD. Like you can spot it from a mile away. Then there's inattentive. Inattentive are kids who struggle more with the executive function deficits, such as more of the focusing, being scattered, disorganized, difficulty with self-monitoring, task initiation, working memory, which hopefully we'll talk about. So and then there's the combined type, which is really a little bit of both. So if you're inattentive, it's so much harder to catch that diagnosis because they're the kids who they're not misbehaving in class. They're just not accomplishing anything. They're just kind of living in their own world. So, they tend to get missed. That's why boys in elementary school are twice as likely as girls to be diagnosed, because girls are much more likely to be inattentive. So they're just not thriving in school, and nobody really figures it out. And sometimes they don't even pay attention to it because they're not causing any problems. They're just not there. So that's why it's underdiagnosed a lot. When it comes to adults, for sure, because we don't really do a lot as far as education awareness with adults. What's out there, what kind of the branding of ADHD is that it's a children's disorder. And it's really, it's kids and adults don't really have it. Adults grow out of it. That's really the kind of the common perception. We do know statistically, as early as 2001, the diagnosis rates were 4.4% of the adult population. And I would tell you that's significantly higher than that. That's a really conservative estimate, because we know that 11% of children are being diagnosed with ADHD. So if they're 90% are carrying into adulthood, that's a lot. So that's why it's the most underdiagnosed. And the reason why it's the most overdiagnosed is because there are so many things that mimic ADHD. And so we kind of think, oh, that's ADHD, and really it's not. And then we treat it as ADHD, and we're really not helping because we're targeting the wrong things. So there are other things. For example, a sleep disorder can mimic ADHD, because remember, ADHD, people with ADHD suffer from executive function deficits. So they have a hard time managing their life. They're like flying, overwhelmed. The bills are never paid. The appointments are never made. And when they're made, they're not kept. And when they're kept, they're not followed up on. It's just like life is a mess. Everyone's overwhelmed. Their houses are flying. Nothing's getting done. They can't plan. They have difficulty with time management. All of that is coming forward in adulthood. So if you have a sleep disorder, then you may have an executive function issue. You can also have executive function issue without having ADHD. And then there are other things such as trauma, and various different other disorders that mimic ADHD. So it tends to be missed a lot and found too much. It's kind of complicated, but by the end of this podcast, like hopefully we'll have it all worked out and
we'll have it all
in save the world.
Yeah. Okay. So now, because we're gonna have hopefully we're gonna have a lot of parents listening, and I want to now go into two different in two stages. One about adult ADHD, and then children with ADHD how to parent. But everything starts with oneself, right? So let's start with the adults for a second. Before we get into what adults should do if they think they have or don't have whatever, and how they manage it, can you just maybe elaborate on the genetic part? Because here's something that I'm struggling to understand. You're telling me that there's a genetic component to it, and which would then mean this is something that we've had for, I don't know, hundreds of years, thousands of years. Who knows? Is something, something in the brain. There's some chemistry imbalance or whatever it is. So if that is true, then why is there only a rise in cases right now in the last, let's say, quarter century, half a century, et cetera? That would seem to be that it's more, nurture than nature. That's like, it's our society. So is it both? Is it neither? Which one?
So I'm gonna go with both. I'll tell you that we have documented cases of what is presumed to be ADHD as early as I think it's the 1700s. Back then, or maybe it's the 1800s. I don't know. It's 100 years between friends. But back then, really, they just thought these kids were crazy. Like it was like these kids are nuts. They're problematic. They're uncontrollable, and nobody really knew what to do with them. Over the last, I would say, 50 years or so, when scientists started doing intense research on the disorder, and they kind of started to break it down and understand it and pull out the symptoms and develop and build a profile for it, then we started to get it. Several years ago, they switched it. It was initially ADD, and then it became this ADHD with the three types, which is a more recent development. And then as awareness is building, more and more people are it's clicking in their head. They're like, hey, maybe this is me. Every time I do a show like this, I get flooded with emails after that, like, wow, you were talking about me, and like, what do I do about it?
Yes, we are talking about you, whoever's listening.
I think by the end of this podcast, we may be talking about you. I don't know. Well, let's see what happens.
That's fine. Yeah.
But it's the saddest thing that there are so many adults that are really struggling, and there is that, and it's biological, and they're blaming themselves, and they just think they're no good, and forget it when it comes to marriage. Maybe we'll get into that. But I would just say, when recent research has shown that they've done MRIs on the brains of kids with ADHD and kids without ADHD. And what they discovered is that the prefrontal cortex, so the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobes, the front part of your brain, that's the part of your brain that's controlling executive function. That's like the CEO of your brain. Like when you need to plan something, when you need to figure something out, when you get something done, right? The director of operations, really, right? That's the operations center, the prefrontal cortex. That's where it's all at. Kids with ADHD, their prefrontal cortex, the thickness is about 3 years delayed. That's pretty recent research. So you can really tell and understand what's going on. So if you're delayed in development of your prefrontal cortex, we can understand why kids with ADHD are having so much trouble with organization, with task initiation, with being flexible thinkers, with all the things that are going on that they need to cope and survive in a classroom, in the playground, et cetera. They're just not there yet. Kids with ADHD are 3 to 5 years delayed emotionally, and that's the biggest thing. If you have a kid who's 12 years old, who's acting like a 7-year-old, we can now understand, because intellectually he's bright, he's gifted, he's 12. Physically, he's 12, but emotionally, he's acting like a 7-year-old. So when he's melting down, having tantrums, beating up kids, throwing things around, you're like getting so upset and frustrated, like act your age. He's not. He's just not there yet. So that helps us understand, I hope.
I would imagine if that's the case, telling that 12-year-old, you're acting like a 7-year-old will make things only worse, because to him, that's where he's holding. Is that right?
Yeah, if you have like a powerful firecracker in your kitchen and you light it, that would be the equivalent experience, because that's going to trigger an explosion. And at that point, my best advice for you is to just hide it under the table until it's over, because there's not much you can do in that space. But to wrap back to the nature versus nurture, you're correct. When you get to adulthood, so really what researchers are finding now is that symptoms will wax and wane, and a lot of it will depend on your environment and what's going on. So, for example, in a marriage, what you'll find is that things might be going swimmingly until the kids come, and then all of a sudden, when you start having children, and we're dealing with carpools, drop-offs, pickups, briefcase packing, bedtime, wake up, all that is just overwhelming, and then you have someone who's suddenly really not functioning as a parent or as a spouse. So yes, correct, that the environment does play an important role in how the symptoms will come out, but the biological component is certainly there.
You referenced once on another podcast that the of course, when it comes to children, I know I just realized we're going out of order, but once we're in the middle of this,
Well, this is an ADHD
that's right. The
presentation, and
flavor of the
I feel like we should model what it's like to be
right,
all over the place,
exactly.
all over the map, and yeah. So wherever you want to go, let's do
Right,
it.
let's do that. So you said on another show that, and you quoted, I think, our Rabbi Elephant, who, by the way, I told him when that I was having you, and he's, he was very happy to hear that. I wasn't so happy about the response when I asked him if he would come on, but that'll be another episode, another conversation.
Take some work.
Yeah, but jokes aside, you said that you quoted him about parents not having the proper recognition of how powerful, how like almost godlike they are to their children. Even though children will never admit it, generally speaking, but
not mine, Ellie.
You're right, not out. Exactly, same here. But if that's the case, is it possible that a child could have all the the cards are, it's stacked against him. He has all the genetic reasons to be real ADHD and have a lot of disorders, but his parents are just such warm and loving people. Not perfect, but the home is just such a happy home that a lot of the negative effects of ADHD are just never brought to the front because they were never triggered. Is there such a concept?
Certainly. Certainly, there. If a kid grows up in an authoritative environment that's warm, that's loving, that's nurturing, he'll do better than if the environment is less structured, more chaotic. Kids with ADHD do amazingly well when there's routine, when everything is predictable, when they can understand, because they do get overwhelmed very easily. So if you have parents who are not the ADHD type, which is less likely, they'll do better. But that'll be in the home environment. But you may have a kid who can do well in the home environment because it's kind of working for him or her. And then in school, it'll be a disaster. And that may even work well some years and be a disaster other years, depending on the teacher. Because remember, kids with ADHD will do great if you can hold their attention, if there's something exciting going on. So they'll have a year where they have an amazing teacher, and I'll be like, there's nothing wrong with this kid. He or she does great. They're getting great marks, doing amazing in class. They're engaged, they're with it, they're involved, they're attentive. And then the next year, I'll be like, they fell off the map. And how do we help this kid? So yes, parents have a crucial role to play. I'll tell you a statistic that's a little bit mind-blowing. If a parent has ADHD, then there's a 50% chance that up to half of their children will have ADHD. And if a kid has ADHD, it's about 38% chance that one or both parents will be ADHD. So there's a strong genetic link that's multi-generational. Now what happens is you have a parent who's struggling with ADHD and has difficulty being a consistent parent. The only consistent thing is that they're consistently inconsistent. So you have an inconsistent parent for a kid who needs consistency. And that's really going to be the key to treatment when we get there, is to help the parent so that the parent can help the child. Okay. Just like on the airplanes, you got to put the oxygen mask on yourself
before you go to someone else. Okay, so before we get to treatment, I want to go to parents. What does an ADHD adult look like in terms of what the challenges are? I mean, obviously, you say staying on task in work. So to be honest, like let's say I have a secretary that could do that, or as long as it gets done, who cares if it's today or tomorrow? It gets done before the deadline. I might rush before the deadline. Who cares? I'm not changing my MO for that. And even though I could be more, way more successful if I were, but it's fine. Putting all that aside, what about the house? Because it's hard to outsource relationships inside your home.
Really great. It depends. Before we talk about marriage, let's talk about jobs and the house. In the house, really, it depends which spouse has ADHD. If it's the husband, then the wife is going to be completely miserable. But the house may function because generally, not stereotyping, but generally the wife will be running the house. If it's the husband, if it's the wife who's ADHD, or if they're both ADHD, then we have chaos. Then you're going to have a situation where like the laundry is never done, dinner is never ready, the kids are all over the place, et cetera. That's where you'll have a real breakdown. That's within the context of the home. And really it's because of the executive function struggles. It's difficulty with organizing. Running a family is like running a company. It's no different. It's a lot of work in today's society. Just shopping preemptive is overwhelming,
Sure.
right? And that's for the first kid you're shopping for. I don't know where you live in Lakewood. If you go to a shoe store this week or next week or any week between now and Pesach, good luck. I mean, it's like an 8-hour line to get the person to bring one pair of shoes, which doesn't fit. And now you're stuck for another 8 hours. So it's almost like you can camp out the night before and be the first person in the door. And people, I think, are really up to doing that. So you can imagine how overwhelming life would be at home. In the workforce, it really also depends on what kind of job you have. If someone with ADHD goes into accounting, I almost put them on a suicide watch, because they're just gonna, be bored and overwhelmed. And not everyone, if there's an ADHD accountant out there watching this is doing well, then power to you. That's amazing. You figured it out, because some people did figure it out and they're doing great. And some people really love numbers. Okay. But if they're in a job that plays to their skill set, they'll do really well, or can do really well if they figure things out. If they're in a job that really doesn't, a job that's more monotonous, more working with spreadsheets, a little more on the boring end, not great. If you're in an exciting, fast-paced job that involves people and going places, I don't know. I have a friend who's a real estate property manager, and he does amazingly well because he's all over the place. He's driving, he's going, he's talking, he's hacking, he's busy with the township, the building department, the codes, the tenants, going to court, evicting people. It's a blast. He's always on the move. People with ADHD feel like they have a motor inside of them that needs to be fed. It's always going, right? The motor never stops. So if you're in the type of job that gives you that level of stimulation, it'll be great. But you mentioned another important point. That is that there are some people who are highly, highly successful, the CEO type with ADHD, who are doing fine. And when you talk to them, you'll figure out why. It's because, like you said, they're outsourcing their executive function. So they're bright people. They know what they're good at. They're good at the creative thinking, the leadership, working with people, leading the company, coming up with new strategies, new ideas, opening new branches, everything that's a dopamine hit, right? They're constantly stimulated. They're just going and going and going better than anyone else can. And then when it comes to scheduling appointments, they have a secretary schedule for them. They have an executive assistant who's planning their day and keeping them focused and on track, because otherwise they'd be completely lost. I always say, I don't do my own scheduling and booking in my private practice, because I know that if I would, I'd have 6 people waiting in the waiting room, at the same time, because they all came at the same time, and I'd be in Florida on vacation. So I know that's something that I can handle, and therefore I outsource it, I externalize it. That's learning how to live, but that's a challenge in the work environment, in the job force, and also in the home. You want to talk about marriage?
Yeah, I'll just say it is interesting. Before we get to marriage, last year we had Ira Zlotowitz come on our program and talk a little bit about that, and he said something very interesting. He said that CEOs, typically speaking, not always and not generalizing, but many of them, if not most, are very disorganized. They're always thinking, and they can't keep up with themselves, but they're so progressive in entrepreneurialism. They just have he said the good ones know just to have someone counter them and take care of all the other stuff instead of trying to change themselves and who they are. Now, I don't know if that's exactly what you're saying, but it does seem to be a consensus.
What I'm saying is that leaders of organizations tend to be something about successful organizations like our Zlotowitz's, whichever organization he's up to now. But leaders of organizations,
G-parency, I think.
Yeah, G-parency. You can close for $1,600 or something.
Right.
No idea what that means.
Right.
But I guess it's good marketing, because I know that it took me 12 years to learn about Geico's 15% thing. I'm still stuck on 877 cars for kids. That will never come out of my head. But there is an ADHD implication there. Talk about it later if we remember. But yeah, leaders of organizations are great because they're creative. They're out of the box thinkers. They're problem solvers. They know how to figure things out when everyone else has given up. and they're still going. And at 3 a.m, they have tons of energy, so they're just going, they're developing, they're building, they're growing. And the ones that are successful, you can test me on this. The ones that are successful are the ones who figured out how to manage the executive function deficits by outsourcing it.
Well, and that's really what I want to clarify before we get to the marriage part. Is outsourcing learning how to deal with it, or just avoiding the problem, or both?
So it's really both. It's really both. So, it's learning. Everyone with ADHD is going to figure these things out differently. Some people do well with task management apps, right? So, they have endless apps that are intended to help you run your life, right? It's intended to help you organize. Now, the difference between a neurotypical person and a neurodivergent person, I mean, someone with ADHD, is that the person with ADHD, this is what's going to happen. Okay, I'm going to predict out the pattern for you. Ready?
Okay,
Buckle up. Here we go. So a guy with ADHD is gonna, he's going to be at work, right? He's gonna be working on a spreadsheet. And then it's going to pop up. And the pop-up is going to say, I don't know, any.do is going to change your life because it will help you organize. You're never going to forget anything. Again, it integrates with your email. Incredible. It's be like, wow, this is amazing. This is going to change my life. I finally got that hack that's going to save me. So then he's going to quickly download it on his phone, start playing with it. A half hour later, he'll remember that he was in the middle of a spreadsheet. But okay, he's in the middle of any.do. He's really excited. He starts putting in everything he remembers that he has to do for the next 3 days. It's all there. And by the time he leaves work that day, having completely forgotten the spreadsheet, which has a deadline for the next morning. But okay, he's flying high. I got this. I got this organized. I'm ready to go. And it will probably hold for about a week, and he'll feel great. But then it will fall apart. The reason it will fall apart is because it was exciting at first. It gave him that dopamine. Hey, he felt good. He was organized. He got things together. And then over time, it got a little bit boring, and boring is death for people with ADHD.
Right.
So it's like, okay, after a few days, I'm done. And then the problem with these apps are you have to constantly feed them, right? An app is only as good as the information you're feeding it. But if feeding it takes work, so now we have a task initiation problem. I got to get myself to keep feeding the app. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as I start to feel a little overwhelmed, I'm too overwhelmed to deal with feeding the app. I'm dealing with whatever crisis is coming my way. So some people do well with different types of apps or systems or planners or calendars. And some people with ADHD don't relate to it because they're like, okay, I'll try it. And then 17 task management apps later, they realize that task management apps don't really work for me. So for those people, they may need more help with a human being who's actually sticking with them and following them around. For other people, they'll find a task management app that works, and then they'll go around telling the world, I don't know, any.do is the greatest task management app for people with ADHD, and everyone should sign up, right? And then everyone will sign up, of course, because it sounds fun and exciting and interesting. And then a week later, they'll all be on to the next thing. Uh-huh. So the answer is really a combination of both. Like, you need to find what works for you. Everyone is going to build their own manual. Some people do this well with the help of an ADHD coach, but build your own manual for which hacks work for you. And then over time, you really get better at it. You'll find things, you'll find tips, you'll find tools, you'll find something that helps you. I'll give you an example. Working memory. We haven't really touch on this yet, but people with ADHD struggle a lot with working memory, which means that they can't hold many things in their memory. If you think of like the example I use is a whiteboard, right? You're in school, you have a whiteboard. Thank God we got rid of chalkboards, so we don't have to deal with the scratching fingernails, but you have a whiteboard, right? And on the whiteboard, that's, you're writing down all the things you have to do, right? And you have a huge whiteboard. It's filling, most of the wall, and you write down all the things you have to do, and now it's full. So all your tasks are up there. This is great, but it's full. And now something else comes in. So you don't really have much of a choice. You just erase one thing and put that on. Okay, so that's like a neurotypical way to live life. You have this huge whiteboard in your brain where you're keeping track of everything that you're talking about and dealing with and all your tasks, and it's working really well. Now, what if you shrink that whiteboard to, let's say, the size of a Post-it note? So it could hold about, I don't know, one thing, maybe two, right? So, you start writing tasks on it, and then more tasks are coming in. So what happens to all the tasks that you were writing? They're gone. They don't exist. They're not there unless something triggers you to remember them. So this is what happens to people with ADHD. That's why we're always losing things. If you're ADHD and you're on a phone call, right, and then you get a click, I don't know, let's say your wife clicks in. So you tell your boss, I'll be back in 10 seconds. Let me just tell my wife that I'll call her back. And your wife says, oh, but can you start, and get into a conversation with your wife. You may completely forget that the other person's on the phone, right? Because that wiped from your working memory. right? So you can't hold so many things at once. And then like 20 minutes later, you like hang up with your wife and your irate boss is, patiently or impatiently waiting. And you're like, oh my God, like I forgot, and that will keep happening. So, talk about taking out the garbage, right? Do you take out the garbage? It's a personal question.
Yes, I do. I do.
Okay,
Very proud of it.
amazing. So when you take out the garbage, right? Do you ever have this experience of, you take the garbage bag, you bring it out to the dumpster, and then you go about your day and completely forget to put a new bag in the can?
Me personally, no, but yeah, I can imagine that.
Okay, awesome. So you're not diagnosable as of yet,
Well,
but
or just not from this, but yeah.
yeah. Someone with ADHD, right? This would be classic. You take the garbage bag out, you bring it to the dumpster, right? So you have this task in your brain, put a new bag in, right? But on the way to the dumpster, you meet your neighbor, okay? And he starts talking to you, task gone. So you come back in and you don't even remember that you didn't put a bag in, right? Of course not. Why would you remember? It's gone. You're on to the next thing. Of course, this is Murphy's Law of ADHD. Your wife is going to come with, the salad, the leftover salad bowl from the meal, that big pile of whoop at the bottom
with dressing on it, with dressing,
right? And dump it in the bag, and be like, again, this is the 7th time this month that you didn't put a garbage bag in, right? Okay, so one possible solution would be to put the bag in before you leave the house, right? That would be just a simple hack to kind of reverse the script. So for some people with ADHD, they might get themselves into the habit. Anything's a habit, you're okay. Like once it's a habit, you're good. They might get themselves into the habit of putting the bag in, and then we solve this problem, okay? So example of a hack. If you want to know, by the way, how to diagnose ADHD, just find the people whose umbrellas are left, in the shul building, in the coat room. Because what happened, it was raining when they came in, so they had the umbrella, they put it down, and as soon as they walked in, completely forgot that they had an umbrella. Now if it's raining when they go out, that will prompt their memory, oh, where did I put the umbrella? Then they'll start searching for 15 minutes. Is it, where's, there's piles of umbrellas. But if nothing prompts them to remember it, it's gone from their brain, they'll lose it. And they'll buy 15, 16 umbrellas a year, as many times as it rains, because each time they'll lose umbrella. At one point, I stopped. I used to put little stickers on my umbrellas with my name. They print those labels, and my phone number. But it got really embarrassing, because how many times can you get a call? By the way, like some well-meaning Good Samaritan, your umbrella, you left your umbrella, and I'm like, don't call me, I don't want it. Or the credit card at the gas station, right? You give your credit card to the gas station guy, right? Or you put it in self-serve in New York. You put in the machine. How in the world are you going to remember? Your working memory is not holding, right? So you're not remembering that the card is there, and you drive off the card, and then you're getting 15 calls from the credit card guys, from every station in town. You left your card here, right? And then it becomes a joke.
Right, and then you have to get a new credit card because someone else tried using it, and then you forget to update all your things, which are on automatic payment with the credit card.
Exactly.
That has that spiral.
So this is a downward spiral.
Right now, but what do you tell people not to leave forget their umbrellas and or credit cards at the gas station? What's the I like the garbage bag trick, but what do you do with the other stuff?
I recently heard a great memory tip, which is it's Ohio, which stands for only handle it once. Which really means that I know a bill comes in, pay it if you can. Only handle things once, because the second you put it down, it's gone. It's gone from your memory, which is why people that usually lose their keys a lot. So if you're going to a gas station, you put the card in, put it back in your wallet. Only handle it once. If you leave yourself open to having to remember to come back and get it, I feel bad for you. With keys, right? That's the most common thing. People that are always losing their keys, and you'll find your keys in the strangest places, in the refrigerator, the freezer, wherever you work, because you're not focusing on your keys, and you put your keys down, and then like they're gone, and you're searching for your keys, right? So the good news is now we have what's called the Apple Ear, no, there's I forgot what it's called, the Apple Ear thing or tile, right? The tiles that you attach to your keys, and now you have a Bluetooth on the keys, so that if you lose your keys, you can find it on your phone and it will ring, which is great, right? People that usually do great with tiles, but here's the problem: you have to have your phone to find your keys.
I was about to say,
your phone, you're not finding your keys. And even if you have your phone and your keys, you also have to have actually installed the app, right? And not just put the thing on your keychain. You have to install the app and then program the app. And then, when the battery dies, remember to replace it. So, nothing is foolproof, And this is a lifetime of work. It's figuring out what works for you and making it work best.
Okay, this is awesome. I love that. Now let's get to marriage for a second, because I would imagine that if one spouse has an expectation because they don't have ADHD or they've managed or whatever, but the other one does, that could probably get a little sticky when they have all these expectations that are always consistently not being met. Can you walk us through the ADHD
Yeah.
marriage, the problems, and then the solutions?
So you're sure you want to do this?
Um,
Just checking.
let's
Okay,
do it
let's
this
go.
way. Everyone stop. Give me a 5-star review now, and then
All
you can
right.
continue. But yeah, go on. Of course we want to do
Okay,
that.
here we
That's
go.
what we do here.
Let's have marriage. This is big. Okay, this is really big. Let's understand, I guess, first and foremost, that people with ADHD, right? Like we said before, they have this motor, right? Which means they have an endless need for dopamine, and it's kind of lacking in their brain, right? It's not, they don't have it in the level that they need to, which is what medication addresses. So they need excitement, they need action, they need fun, right? And that's how they get to that state of hyperfocus, which can be so helpful. So now a guy meets a girl and he really likes her and everything's going well. They get engaged, and engagement is amazing. Being engaged to a guy with ADHD is the most incredible experience. And it makes sense. It's because they're getting a ton of dopamine from the relationship, right? It's exciting, it's fun, it's new. So ADHD guy or girl, it doesn't really matter, will lavish attention on his fiancee, right? He's going to take care of her. He's going to write her notes. He's going to surprise her with a million things. They'll have the most incredible proposals ever because they're so creative, out of the box thinkers. They're the guys in the helicopters, over Niagara Falls, and they got the Canadian government to write, "Will you marry me?" with the lights on the water. It's unbelievable. So engagement's going to go really, really well. The problems start after they get married, because then what happens is there's a slowdown in what he's getting out of the relationship. So now you're in a space where he's paying less attention and he's really kind of moved on to other exciting things, whatever's popping up in his life, at work, at school, wherever he is. This leaves the spouse. I'll just stick with husband wife. It's more, it'll be easier. This will leave the wife feeling uncared for, neglected, unattractive. Like I'm just not important to him anymore. Like it was so amazing, and now he's kind of done with me. Sadly, couples or relationships that have one or both spouses with ADHD are twice as likely to end in divorce as the neurotypical population. And it makes sense. It's because this is the pattern. This is what happens in the marriage. So the spouse, or let's call it the wife, starts to feel like he doesn't really care about me anymore. And he's not interested in me. So that creates a rift in the relationship. And now comes the executive function struggles, because then they start having children. And when they start having children, all of a sudden the wife is managing the entire household. She's doing all the tasks that he should be doing. He's reliably unreliable. He's consistently inconsistent. There's nobody home, so she can't count on him to do the things that she needs. She can't even count on him to bring home milk when she needs it for supper, right? Because he's going to forget and buy gum, right? He's just gonna lose it in his working memory. So now she's shouldering the entire burden of the household. He's out having fun and partying and going on trips, and he gets to be the fun guy, right? Like he's the one who's, as the kids are growing, she's the annoying mother, who's just trying to keep them dressed, and fed and at school. And he's off to Six Flags, right? He's having fun. So then she's building resentment, right? And when she's building resentment, she starts to be very critical of him. So she doesn't feel good about herself anymore. Now she feels like, I'm a bad person. I'm just turning into a witch. I became this nag, right? Because she's just driving him crazy and bothering him to come home. Do you really need to stay at work till 7 o'clock? Like, is there a reason why you can't come at 5? Like, what are you doing between 5 and 7? Like, do you really have meetings at 5:30? And are you really on conference calls? Or is that just like to avoid going home? And who could blame him for not wanting to come home and get hollered at by her because he left his socks on the floor again? And now there's like a pile the size of Mount Rushmore of socks. And he has no socks, right? Except for the 30 pairs in his drawer that he hasn't worn in 10 years because he doesn't wear them anymore and never remembered to throw them out. So you can see how this is spiraling. So he's done, she's done. He doesn't feel good about himself because she's just nagging him. It becomes almost like a parent-child relationship where they go from being in a emotional relationship to her kind of being the parent, trying to motivate him to pay attention to her and motivate him to help out in the house and motivate him to get things done, and he's the child, right? Or vice versa. It can go either way. And now you have tension, you have friction, and you have a situation that's ripe for explosion. Remember, if one or both parents is ADHD, you're probably going to have a kid who's ADHD as well, or up to half of your children. So now the whole family system is in chaos. They might have a lot of fun at times, but there's also going to be a lot of conflict, a lot of stress, and that filters into the entire environment.
You don't want to be in their house Erev Shabbos 2 hours before Shkia, that's for sure.
Right, definitely, not the space you want to be, but Purim's going to be a lot of fun there. Cleaning up after Purim, not so much. Right. He's gonna be sprawled out on the couch, and she's gonna be up till 4 a.m. cleaning. But yeah, now if both spouses have ADHD, it's a whole different story. But keep in mind one more thing: people with ADHD have something, tend to. This is not. There's not so much research on this; it's more anecdotal. But there's a lot of talk about it in the community, where people with ADHD have something called rejection sensitivity. There's, I think, Dr. Bill Dodson pioneered the term rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or RSD, which means that they're extremely sensitive to feeling rejected, almost to the extent they describe it as being like physically painful, like they feel like someone hurt them when they feel criticized. So put that into the dynamic where you have a spouse who's highly critical and a nag, and another spouse who's extremely defensive because it hits him at the core. And now you have a relationship that's really, really in distress. So that's kind of the bad part, of marriage with ADHD. But the good part is that when it's dealt with properly, with treatment, with therapy, et cetera, with ADHD coaching, all the different layers of support, then we have a marriage that can be really beautiful, and really flourish and thrive, because all the reasons why she married him or he married her is because he is that fun, creative, spunky, out of the box guy who makes things really fun and exciting, right? That's how it all began. That's still there. It's just, it just needs a lot of work to bring it back. But when there's awareness, and that's really half the battle, is the non-ADHD spouse understanding to the best they can, because you can't really understand it unless you live it. But to the best they can, understanding it and starting to see things as being symptoms, not personality defects. Now we can start to rebuild the relationship. We can start to figure out how to manage the house, and we can start to get to a better, healthier space. So there's a lot of hope when we get there. But unfortunately, so many families, they just don't realize it. They don't even realize it's ADHD. ADHD is like the joke. Oh, it's my ADHD, but it is. And like when they can get that and connect to it and relate to it and understand and do the work and read up on it and learn about it, there's a brilliantly bright future, because they are an awesome couple.
And they could reach the highs that the neurotypical people can't reach, because they're just channeling all that energy. Okay, so that's part of the
sad life of the neurotypicals.
Right, exactly.
Kind of feel bad for them,
Yeah, you got to feel bad for them. That's right.
Do a podcast with like a neurotypical person who can, hopefully pump things up a little.
Well, I think the whole podcast industry is for ADHD people, because you could just stop, go, switch podcasts. The whole thing is very. But I want to now. I want to get to. Let's talk about medication for a second, because it carries this stigma that people would be very embarrassed to get an evaluation, to then go ahead and do it, and then take it, and then maybe not even want to tell people, whatever it is. Is there what to be embarrassed about? Or no, it's just, you take a Tylenol when you have a headache. So it's really the same thing, just this you have to do every day, and you'll be fine. Like, how do you understand the whole medicine? And then my second question on that is, what are the pros and cons if someone makes that decision?
Okay. So this is a big one, probably the most important question we'll talk about, because we know that medication, for example, is effective in about 85% of the time with kids, and really, really helps with ADHD. But you're right. There's a lot of resistance to medication. Just the word medication, it's not a friendly word.
Right.
It's something that that has connotations of difficult illness, and
Right. Controlled substance, or yeah.
it kind of makes sense. So let's start with what you said. You're right. Unfortunately, when it comes to mental health issues, people see them differently than physical issues, right? We don't see, if someone has cancer or something like that, then like, of course, there's no stigma to treatment for cancer. But if someone has a mental health issue or an emotional issue, there's that stigma. And I think we're light years ahead of where we were even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I see the world changing so quickly, and it's encouraging. It's amazing. Working with schools, with educators, it's a world of a difference. Even lots of parents are excited about medication because they understand what it does. Medication, it's like wearing glasses. It's just like there's a neurochemical deficit in your brain with dopamine, with norepinephrine, and we're addressing that. So it's what it's doing is it's unlocking your ability to be the best version of you. Mm-hmm. It's not solving your problem. Pills don't teach skills. You still got to work. That's something parents tell me. They're like, well, if I give my child medication, then it's like a crutch, right? He'll never learn to live. I say just the opposite. He's going to have a really hard time learning to live without the medication because he doesn't have the ability to meet the challenges of his environment. If someone's suffering from severe impulse control, he knows what to do. He just can't do what he knows, right? He's struggling at the point of performance. It's not a problem. He knows he shouldn't call out in class, but he can't control it. A thought comes into his head and he blurts it out before he even has a chance to put on a filter and say, hey, should I think this out? Should I not? Should I speak this out? Should I not? Should I call out? Should I not? It's just like a thought gone, right? It's out there before he even realizes he had the thought. And medication will help with that. It will slow him down just enough so that he can make a conscious decision and understand, is this appropriate or is this not? Just like all the other kids in his class, but he doesn't have that chance. Medication brings him up to the level so that now we've unlocked his ability to actually succeed in the world. Also, parents worry a lot about side effects. And there are some potential side effects, but what I found more often than not is that parents will try medication for their children. It won't go well, and they'll just give up and move on and say, okay, medicine doesn't work. And that's I guess the biggest problem, that's the most frustrating, that they're missing the basic understanding that we don't really know. There's $1 million question. There are different classes of medications. There are stimulants. Within stimulants, there's methylphenidate, there's amphetamines, and then there's non-stimulants. They're all different medications, class of medications, dosages, et cetera. And we don't really have a great way to figure out which medicine is going to work for which person and at which dose, because everyone metabolizes medication differently. Mm-hmm. So it is a little bit of a trial and error process to figure out what combination of medications till you get it right. It could take 3 months, it could take 6 months, and along the way, there might be some side effects while we're trying to figure this out. But so many parents give up on the process because they're like, oh yeah, I tried medication, my kid didn't fall asleep at night, and that was the end of it. And then I see that kid, unfortunately, as in his late teens, or as a 35-year-old, and I'll say like, so did you ever, and he's like, yeah, I tried medication when I was 10, it didn't work. And they had gone to someone who wasn't really experienced in treating ADHD and didn't really, and they didn't stick with the process. So I feel like, yes, number one is we know that medications can be so helpful. I will tell you, can I give you some shocking statistics? Kids with ADHD that doesn't get treated, their life expectancy decreases by somewhere between 13 and 25 years, depending who you ask. And the reason is because they're the type of, they have the profile to take lots of risks. They're much more likely to get into car accidents, to get into other kinds of, work-related accidents, et cetera. They're much less likely to take care of their health properly because they're not going to remember to take their cholesterol medication. Which reminds me, they're not going to remember to take their cholesterol medication. I really have to get back on that. They're not going to remember to make the doctor's appointments. They're not going to remember to go to the doctor's appointment, to do the follow-up, to do the testing that they're supposed to. So their life expectancy goes down. Their ability to earn money, I think, is decreased by somewhere around $10,000 a year last time I checked. So they make less money. They're much more likely to have, to have addictions, et cetera, if it's untreated. So we know, and Russell Barkley, who's kind of like, I guess the real ADHD guru is certainly not me, but Russell Barkley considers the ADHD medications to be neuroprotective, which means that his research is showing that the kids who take ADHD medications earlier on do better academically, they do better emotionally, they have better relationships, their marriages are better, their jobs are better, their careers are better, they're earning more money, their satisfaction is better. So that's what all the research is showing. It's just there's a lack of understanding and awareness. ADHD medications have been around for 70 years. They're from the most safe medications, and they don't have a long-term effect. They have kind of in your system, out of your system. So that's the case I would make. But what I see when I work with parents is there's a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of just like lack of knowledge, lack of awareness, etc.
Okay. I don't want to keep these for too long, but there's two things that we didn't get to that I really want to. You mentioned that it's really just there's a deficiency. There's something in the prefrontal cortex that there's a little delayed, and that's what's causing all this. Are there any other things besides attention related matters that having this deficiency could impact, like, I don't know, anxiety or depression or anything else? Is there a correlation? And if so, can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so there are a lot of statistics on co-occurring disorders. I think it's a 60% rate of comorbidity, which means that someone with ADHD has a 60% chance of having some other issue going on. Anxiety depends on which study you look at or which meta-analysis, but I would say somewhere between 35 and 45% chance of having anxiety. Depression is about 30%. Oppositional defiance disorder, this is huge. A lot of kids get diagnosed with ADHD because they're oppositional defiant, and that's the clue that helps us figure it out. Kids with ADHD have a 60% chance of being oppositional defiant, and those are the kids who are angry, who are bitter, who are anti-authority. We see them as anti-authority anyway. They're the kids who do the opposite of everything you ask them. Like it's kind of, you need to learn to ask them the opposite so that they'll do what you want. But yeah, those difficult, aggressive, angry kids are often really struggling with ADHD, and learning disabilities that are 15 to 25%. There's also a strong connection to spectrum-related disorders, on the autism spectrum. So there's a lot of that, which is why a differential diagnosis is so important. It's so important to not just like say, hey, okay, this is ADHD, let's put them on medication and go. We want to understand what's co-occurring, what's underlying, what else is going on for this kid or for this adult, so that we can treat everything. We kind of got to make sure we do that, because if you treat the wrong thing, you may not be so helpful.
Okay. And what about if you mentioned someone who has this motor, they always need to, keep on constantly filling it. I mean, that reminds me a lot of what you hear people say when they're bored, they stress eat. They just eat and nonstop eating. Is that very much related to this? And if so, well, then that creates its own set of health challenges besides everything else that they're involved with. So what would the response be? I mean, you just tell them to just, binge on carrots? Like, how do you manage that part?
So I'm trying to figure this out. I think the best thing is to live in a white box with no food.
Right.
That works for me sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, because, a lot has to do with impulsivity. It's really hard to control your urges. So ADHD, people with ADHD tend to be like the seesaw dieters type, where like some people, they'll get this new diet. I don't know, some exciting diet they'll read in Mishpacha magazine, and they'll try and they'll be all into it, and they'll lose 12 pounds in 3 weeks and really do amazing. And then they'll swing all the way back because, they have to work so hard on that impulse control for 3 weeks that now they're totally in chocolate cake, buried in chocolate cake. And next thing you know, they gain double the amount of weight. Right. So there's so much about the difficulty with controlling your impulses that gets in the way. So that certainly medication can help with that. Therapy, coaching, there are so many different strategies. I say about kids, Hillary Clinton said, her famous book, which she didn't really make up the line, and came from South Africa, which said it takes a village to raise a child, right? So I think it takes a planet to raise a child with ADHD. So there's so many layers of support that are needed. But when you build that scaffolding and you help a kid like that get through childhood and manage really the hardest environment, the most challenging environment with this, which is school, they can be amazing. Like if they emerge from elementary school with their self-esteem intact, feeling good about themselves, feeling good about their lives, feeling their own sense of self and self-worth, sky's the limit. These kids are going to soar. They're going to do amazing. They're going to host podcasts.
Right.
I'm joking.
And my last and final, you have been so generous with your time. My last question is, when can Columbus, Ohio see Dovid Becker? You had a great Ohio reference earlier.
I know.
So, that's when I just jotted down. Oh, last question. When are you going to come to Columbus? So how do we get you out here?
So yeah, I can leave now, but I would love to. I love to. I really love sharing, presenting, talking to people. Like for me, that's my dopamine. It's energy. To be on this show is energy for me. I'll be wired the whole day now because we had so much fun.
Love that.
So I'll come to Columbus. I might miss the flight. So I just need to book 2 flights. It's no big deal. But yeah, we'll definitely be in touch with my executive function assistant and be happy to work that out.
Awesome. This was great. I should let our listeners know that Rabbi Reb Dovid and I connected this past Shabbos in was it Stamford, Connecticut. And I'll tell everyone who's listening to this needs to know that Dovid is the guru of ADHD. He's sought after by so many people. And I walk into the hotel, and who's the one who's waiting to greet people, to help them where they are? It's our very own. So you're not just a expert, not just such a qualified professional, but you're also a humble and mensch. So that's something that we really much appreciate, and it would be an honor to bring you out here and help all of us live better, more functioning lives, whichever way it takes to get there. So thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate that, and hopefully we'll make that happen soon. Love for you to come out, and much continued success and hatzlacha with all your work, and looking forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you, Hillel. Thanks for having me. Make it a fun, focused day, or as focused as possible. Looking forward. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
To listen to all Kolot episodes and see upcoming guests, visit kolotpodcast.com. We are also on all podcast players. Type in Kolot on iTunes, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, Podbean, and Amazon. Share with your friends, and please make sure to give us a 5-star review. Kolot is a project of the Columbus Community Kollel, a full-time Jewish learning center in Bexley, staffed with high-caliber Torah scholars. Ever since 1995, boys, girls, men, and women from all backgrounds and affiliations have found many opportunities to connect with Torah and mitzvos at the Kollel. Whether it's a study partner, an engaging lesson, or a program, the Kollel is your one-stop shop for all your Jewish learning. If you want to know how you can benefit from the Kollel, visit thekollel.org. That is TheKollel.org, and forever be inspired.